Hello and welcome to DROIX. In this video we will be comparing the ONEXPLAYER i5 versus i7 models over a series of benchmarks to see the performance differences. These will include system as well as gaming benchmarks.
Fight!
First of all, let's take a look at the differences in technical specifications for both devices. The i5 1135G7 and i7 1165G7 both have 4 cores and 8 threads. But there is a difference in the maximum clock speed with 4.2 and 4.7 GHz respectively. Both the i5 and i7 have the same Iris Xe graphics running at 1.3 GHz. The i7 has 96 execution units versus 80 on the i5. Execution units are the compute processors optimised for simultaneous multi-threading, so the more EUs, the higher the computing power. Both models have the same 16GB dual-channel LPDDR4X running at 4266 MHz, as well as the high-speed PCIe NVMe SSD. We will be checking those for their performance as well. To ensure fairness, the two models are set up identically. We are using the same screen resolution, graphics settings and turbo mode disabled on both. We start the system benchmarks with PCMark, which gives us an overall indication of performance across the CPU, GPU, RAM and storage. The i7 should naturally have a higher score, but by how much? The i5 scores 3032 with above average scores across the tests, and noticeably excelling on disk speeds. The i7 scores 4094 with excellent CPU, memory and disk speed scores. This gives us a 28% difference, which is quite a gap. We double checked everything, rerun the tests and again got similar scores. Both models perform very well, but we can see a clear difference in the CPU, graphics and memory scores. PCMark performs a more real-world set of benchmark tests for a variety of day-to-day tasks, including web browsing, media playing and image editing. The i5 scores a respectable 3900 with good scores across all of the tests. The i7 scores a very impressive 5090 with higher scores across all of the tests. This gives us a 26% increase in performance on the i7, which is a similar difference in performance on PassMark. In both the artificial and real-world usage benchmarks, there is a considerable increase in performance on the i7. This means that from booting into Windows, opening software and loading and saving large files, for example, they will be noticeably faster on the i7. 3DMark tests the CPU and graphics for their performance. Not only is this a good test for gaming performance, but it's also for tasks such as media viewing, editing images and rendering video. The i5 scores a very good 1535, which is very close to the best scores recorded compared to other similar CPU configurations. The i7 scores 1778, again is close to the best scores on other similar configurations. The difference in performance between the i5 and i7 is a bit closer at 14%. Now that graphics rendering is tested fully, we can see that massive gap closing a little, but will it stay that way? Although we checked the SSD performance on PassMark, DiskMark gives us a closer look at the speeds of the internal storage over a series of tests. Both devices are getting read and write speeds of around the same amount as each other. There are slight differences, but if we run the tests again, we would get differing scores. And both are extremely impressive scores. That's over 2 gigs a second, best reading and writing speeds. Now we move on to gaming, which is what the ONEXPLAYER is made for. We are, in most cases, using the highest available graphics settings to really stress the CPU and GPU, so they may not reach the full 60 frames per second. In normal circumstances, you may need to run at lower settings such as medium and high, or have the turbo mode enabled. We start first with Total War Saga DROIX, which on ultra settings is a very demanding game. We are running at 1920 by 1080 with the game's default ultra settings. The i5 has an average of 11.4 frames per second, which is very reasonable at this resolution and graphics settings. The i7 has an average of 14.4 frames per second. The difference is just over 3 frames per second, which may not seem much, but that is a 21% difference. While running the Forza Horizon 4 benchmarks, we had a few graphics glitches on both devices, which leads us to think there may be a minor compatibility issue on the game or graphics drivers. The i5 scores a very respectable 33 frames per second, with a low frame rate of 27 and high of 44. The i7 scored a higher 38 frames per second with a lower 32 and high of 52. The two average frame rates give us a performance difference of 14%. This difference being lower may be due to the game being more optimised, as well as taking advantage of the multiple CPU cores and threads more efficiently. It is, however, still a decent 14% difference. Next, we benchmarked the forthcoming Final Fantasy XIV expansion called Endwalker. We are running this benchmark at 1920 by 1080 on high settings, with the only setting changed to make it run full screen instead of a window. The i5 scores 3344 with a slightly low performance rating. The i7 scores a higher 4165, even running well enough to reach the standard rating to play the game, which is impressive. This gives us a score difference of 21%. With a few tweaks to the i5, we would be able to play the game with no issues. The i7, however, should be fine to play straight away, maybe turning on the turbo mode for a performance boost or altering a few minor settings. For this test on Street Fighter V, we are running the game at 1920 by 1080 with all graphics settings to maximum. Despite the i5 at the top starting the benchmark first by around 2 or so seconds, you will see by the end of the clip that the i7 on the bottom actually catches up because of the increased frame rate and how the game works. Time to sum everything up to see the difference in performance between the ONEXPLAYER i5 and i7. PassMark saw the largest difference in models with a massive 29.8%. PCMark had a 26% difference. 3DMark closed the gap with a 14% difference. A Total War Saga DROIX saw the gap widen again with a 21% difference. Forza Horizon 4 saw a 14% difference, and Final Fantasy XIV has a 21% difference. This gives us an average difference across the benchmarks of around 20.9%, which is a fairly large gap, especially when there is only a 9% difference in price. The i7 is a clear winner in terms of performance versus price. Considering what we saw with the GBD Win 3, i5 and i7 models, the performance differences were not as large. It made sense to consider both devices based on the price you wanted to pay, but with the ONEXPLAYER, It's literally a no-brainer to opt for the i7 model. The small extra cost is definitely worth the performance gain. If you would like to see some actual gameplay footage of the ONEXPLAYER i7 model, we have compiled a video showing 9 games running. You can find the link in the description or in the following video link on screen. That wraps up this benchmark video. We hope you found it useful in deciding which model to go for. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up to date with our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one.